Welcome to Litcast, the podcast covering literature notes and revision for WJEC. These podcasts are designed to be used as an additional revision tool. There's nothing new or groundbreaking here, just revision notes in an on-the-go friendly format. Using these alone won't guarantee you an A star, but they can help you build your confidence to apply this knowledge to your exam questions and your classwork. With that being said, let's get started. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Litcast, and the first episode on the new text, Heroes by Robert Cormier. Heroes is one of the texts that you will study and be examined on for Unit 2 of Literature, GCSE, and is the only text that you will study for examination that does not involve context. So the focus really is on writer's craft, narrative, word choice, sentence structures, and it really gives you a chance to delve into the complexity and the intelligence that is constructing such a concise and yet rich piece of literature. You will be asked to look at an extract and an essay, so these podcasts are simply designed, as before, to give you some brief notes on characters and themes to help build your confidence, specifically really with content for essays. They're certainly not comprehensive in terms of quotations or indeed notes themselves, but they are designed to kind of give you that confidence and that grounding, that understanding, so that you can approach the text then from a slightly more informed perspective. You can use these then to build your confidence in any areas of weakness that you find that you are experiencing maybe in class, and they're just an extra revision tool for you. So today we're going to have a look at the character of Francis Cassavant, the protagonist or the hero, and I use that term tentatively really, the hero in Heroes. He's the narrator of the novel, so it is important to distinguish between the narrator and the author. Francis Cassavant is the voice of the novel. He's the speaker, if you will, but he's not the author. It's argued that one of the scenarios that is considered after the end of events in the story, one of the scenarios is that Francis then goes and writes the book that we are reading, but that doesn't mean that he is the author as such. So Robert Cormier is the author. Whenever we talk about the author, whenever we talk about author's craft, writer's craft, etc., we are talking about him. We are not talking about Francis. However, Francis is the voice that we hear. So Cormier has created this construct that is Francis and can explore lots of ideas through him. And it's important to think about the idea of this biased narrator and character narrator because of that bias, because he's potentially then unreliable. And lots of the opinions we see, the language choices, the right down to sort of certain word choices, especially surrounding Larry and Nicole, all stem from this idea that Francis is the one communicating these ideas to us. And Francis has opinions and feelings towards both of these characters, so obviously his language choices are going to be skewed, his sentence structuring is going to be skewed because of the emotion behind them. And that is a key part in selecting key quotes, understanding the emotion of the character of Francis, because a lot of the emotion, a lot of understanding of the internal workings of him as a character comes down to exploring the text and the construction of the text itself, because he is the one who has theoretically put this together, and it is his voice and his thoughts. So Francis is the narrator. He's returned to Frenchtown with horrific war injuries, and his mission is to seek out revenge on the man who's ruined his life, Larry LaSalle. So Francis is striking in terms of his physical appearance at the start of the novel, as well as then as we go on, the complexity of his mind as well is really interesting. He wants to hide his identity. He wants to kill Larry LaSalle. He doesn't consider himself a hero to the point where he doesn't feel like his life is worth living. He wants to kill himself. He has attempted to, or has considered killing himself, and has attempted to as well. He is encouraged by Larry LaSalle as well before the war. Larry LaSalle and him share a really interesting relationship before the terrible events that happen. There is a sort of love shared there. There's an admiration, and there's this sort of aspirational quality where Francis wants to be like Larry LaSalle. LaSalle builds his confidence. He lets him win at table tennis, but again, the idea of letting him win, Larry LaSalle always being in control, and Francis being sort of aware of this and not being massively bothered by it, but it being there as foreshadowing as to what will happen. The fact that Francis is ultimately controlled by Larry LaSalle, and that is a key aspect of their relationship. He does look up to LaSalle. He considers LaSalle to be his hero. He also wants revenge, of course, on Larry LaSalle after the incident with Nicole. And when he tracks down LaSalle, he doesn't go through with shooting him, which you can argue perhaps is either a heroic or non-heroic thing to do, depending on the argument that you were trying to make. Larry LaSalle convinces him that he is a good person and tells him that one gun is enough to take his life, so his own gun, which then, of course, we know he commits suicide. So Francis in the novel returns to Frenchtown. He doesn't reveal his identity, and it's important to remember that the quote right from the start, that opening paragraph, "I have no face." He is not saying that his face is injured. He's not saying that he's not kind of describing it like that. He does then go on to talk about the features of his face and the fact that he has one, but that initial statement is particularly poignant because it perhaps highlights the fact that he considers himself to be without an identity, or his identity isn't worth talking about, or he still wants to conceal his identity. He's lonely and damaged, both physically and emotionally. Through his experiences and attitudes, we explore the concept of heroism. And the idea of heroism and anti-heroism is most definitely explored thoroughly through Francis's character, his reactions to things, and also how Francis views other people. His friends in St. Jude's, the relationship between him and Nicole, him and Larry, pretty much everyone. The character of Francis also allows Cormier to explore the emotional vulnerability of young adults. Remember, he's not particularly old. He's, not too different in age from you guys who are taking the exam. So thinking about emotions of someone that age and then the circumstances that he's been put in. His life is changed forever by Nicole and by Larry, and his love for Nicole is the means by which Larry's true nature is exposed. And his comments upon this kind of area in his life, this defining period in terms of his emotional development and his motivations, that's where Cormier kind of really explores the impact of war, the impact of these kind of issues, there's major events happening in his life, his upbringing, the fact that he's from a non-stereotypical kind of happy family. He's fairly neglected as a child, and sort of didn't have a lot of friends. And is quite a shy child as well. So exploring all of these ideas and exposing these ideas of a troubled youth, but also this idea of deception and guilt, appearance versus reality, which is one of the major themes in this book, along with really the war and the effects of war and heroism. So Francis, as a narrator, comments upon the central moment in his life, and the central moment in his life is, of course, the incident between Larry and Nicole. And in doing so, it's the means in which Robert Cormier can explore all of these ideas. Now, you want to be aware of that idea of that bias, the fact that Francis is looking through a particular lens at different things, which is more apparent because of the non-linear narrative. Because it's split across 3 different timelines, you get to see the different tone at different points. So there's high moments of emotion, in terms of positive emotion. For example, when Larry returns and he's the hero and there's the party, and Francis is with Nicole, and he talks about buying her a dress. I'll buy you one like that someday. And it's that idea of the someday. He very rarely talks about his future. Quite often he talks about shutting doors, closing doors, not real doors, but doors to the future. He doesn't think of himself as having a future. He doesn't think that it's worth thinking about, and obviously he tries to actively end his future by attempting to commit suicide. But he does have those high moments, that particular high moment with Nicole, thinking of a future with her, and or potentially with her, which is then juxtaposed against Larry's rape of Nicole. He has this almost obsessive infatuation with Nicole, but it runs deeper than that. It's a true love, and remember, we're looking at this through his eyes. So that idea of it would always be Nicole Renard, he describes her as a saint. She's in white, and all of the symbolism throughout this book, again, because Francis is considered to be the narrator, all of that symbolism is purposefully there to make us think of her as this pure, perfect, saint-like creature. And he is motivated by her for everything. He wants to avenge her as such. He wants to, because of that, because of his obsession and his love for Nicole, he is very single-minded. He goes back to Frenchtown to avenge her, to exact revenge upon Larry. And when he finally confronts him, his single-minded mission appears to have reached its conclusion. And that has been his motivation. We don't know what his plan is after that. It's implied that maybe there is no plan after that, and his life is therefore not worth living. And then, of course, the ending is fairly ambiguous. But he says, "I'm tired of this talk, impatient to do what I came here to do." So there is a very complex character in Francis, but his motivation is fairly singular, and we know that throughout. And it's quite interesting that when you look at the present day, it's a really straightforward story and fairly simplistic, but by creating this non-linear narrative, it builds up that tension, it builds up that drama, so that we are desperate for him to find Larry and to do what he came to do, and to really bring himself some closure as well, because we slowly just find out more about him. And it's a very clever construction of narrative that allows those gaps to be filled in amongst a very simplistic present day narrative. Nicole opens up a range of emotions that Francis has never experienced before. So he's enjoyed the encouragement of Larry, like we said before, the table tennis tournament. He's admired him, and the sense of Francis feeling valued, because Francis, as we said, was fairly lonely, didn't have a lot of friends, didn't feel particularly valued, and that is then built up again through several different events, culminating then in the table tennis tournament, and Francis feeling great, feeling confident, and that's something that Larry can't take away as such. So and that again is something that we can explore when we look at Larry LaSalle, because Larry LaSalle is a multifaceted character as well, and yes, he did terrible things, but he says, "There's that one sin of mine take away from basically all the good things that he's done." So Larry, 100%, he destroys Francis's trust, he destroys his relationship. Francis really feels like he's destroyed his life, and therefore he needs to find Larry and carry out this mission. But it's that idea of, doing that for that closure. He also feels like, because he didn't stop Larry, because he was at that point where he was manipulated by him to the point where he didn't know what to do, he didn't know how to, and I mean, you could argue that even if he did try, what could he do? He feels that he's being rightly punished and that he needs to atone for his sins. So it's an act of atonement as well as revenge, going and dealing with Larry for Nicole on Nicole's behalf. We want to think about Francis as an outsider. He observes his own life. He's very matter-of-fact in his tone. He's quite chatty about things that are pretty mature, they're pretty sensitive topics, and he's very reflective as well. He becomes consumed by this idea of revenge and punishment, and it becomes his reason for living. And that's where the end of the book becomes potentially ambiguous, because we don't know what his purpose for living is once he has met Larry and once he's completed what he came to do. And one of the themes that we could look at really that can provide perhaps a more positive ending is the theme of reading and of books. The symbolism of literature throughout the book is quite interesting. There's 5 or 6 different books that are mentioned, and hopefully in another episode we'll go through each one and just briefly mention what they are. It's not essential for you to know what each one is, but depending on what extract you may get, it can be something that can enhance your analysis, again, depending on the question and the context. But the use of books is very carefully, the books are very carefully chosen, they're symbolic, and Francis mentions a couple of times that he wants to be a writer, when he was younger, before everything happens to him. So that idea of being a writer and writing the book that we're reading is one of the more optimistic and positive endings potentially, and you can see where that idea comes from because of that theme of literature and reading and books throughout the story. Now, depending on what your teacher says about the ending and so on, you may want to kind of consider other endings, or take that idea or leave it. But it's one idea out there that this positive ending stems from this love of books that Francis has and this love of stories, which again feeds into some of the imagery that he uses to describe some of the other characters. He says about Nicole, there's a quote, something like a night I knelt at her feet. And that's a very stereotypical fairy tale image, which again can lean into that idea of literature and this kind of idea that you can imagine a child like that who's very lonely, doesn't have a lot of friends, quite shy. They're going to lose themselves in stories. They'll lose themselves in those fantasies, and he's certainly a kind of character that might do that. So that's some notes, a couple of short quotes, and just some general points on the character of Francis. Maybe some things to consider when you're rereading the story, some things maybe to look out for. I would recommend short quotes. I'd recommend quotes that are versatile so that you can use them across several different themes or several different characters, and your class teachers will have great recommendations for good quotes or good moments to look at as well. When planning an essay, something that can be quite handy is the idea of the triangle approach. So if you imagine a triangle with characters down one side, key moments and relationships on another, and themes on the other, you look at the question that you've been given, the essay question, and if your essay question is character based, then you would cover characters, which means you're going to focus on key moments and relationships to do with that character and themes that character embodies. So, for example, if the question was on Francis, I would look at any themes that Francis embodies or exemplifies, and any key moments that I would want to mention in terms of his character or key relationships that he has. And of course, in this text, the main relationships are going to be Larry, Nicole and Francis. Those three are massively intertwined. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other two, and that's a great starting point. And then you kind of build from there. As well as that, remember that this text does not require context. So you can really delve into that analysis and really get some interesting one-word quotes, single-word analysis, looking at adverbs in particular are great to look at character motivation and setting the mood of a piece. And looking at sentence structures, sentence types, sentence modes, punctuation. Lots of these things are, consciously crafted to really tell this story in the most effective way possible. So looking at those again is a really good bet. And making sure as well that you're trying to use some linguistic terminology. So if you know a word type or a word class, state it. Don't just say word, say verb, say noun, say adverb. If you know what sentence mode that you are looking at, say that it's a declarative or say that it's an imperative, because you'll find that actually they're really important. And the use of an imperative, for example, can show a commanding nature. So does Larry use imperatives when he's talking to Francis at a particularly important moment? Because that is going to show that you really understand how that language has been crafted to really enhance those particular moments in the story. That's the end of this episode. If there's something specific that you would like us to go through in another episode, then either let your class teacher know, write on Google Classroom, or you can tweet at St. Cyrie's English, and we will do our best to create an episode that will help you out. Our other episodes covering other characters will be up very soon. In the meantime, as I said, if you need any extra help, or if there's any episodes that you want some coverage of, then let us know. All of the notes that I am discussing are either in classroom materials that your class teacher has, or they are part of the York Notes guide, which teachers have copies of that you are obviously able to look at, or they are available to purchase. I hope this was helpful to some of you. Thank you very much for listening, and happy revising. The music used in this podcast is by Ixon, and you can find him on SoundCloud. The tracks used are Eclipse and Explore.